250 years of the most aggressive, badass fighting force on the planet, the United States Marine Corps. Mr. Tommy James, this week on the David Rutherford Show. All right, so one of the things that I learned really early on in life was the power of the Marine Corps. And that is because my best friend I grew up with, who was in 5 different high schools, didn't know what he wanted to do with his life, graduates, joins the Corps, goes to Parris Island, turns his entire life around, and becomes one of the hardest working human beings I've ever known in my life. Now, that set the tone for me as I went in the Navy. And then every opportunity that I got to work with Marines over the 8 years that I was in, the time I was at Blackwater and the time that I was at the agency, every single time they were the most hard-charging, focused, dialed-in guys on every opportunity, every op, every interagency op, everything I ever did. The Marine Corps was always the most gung-ho. And so to honor them and to honor their stories, I had somebody, a friend of mine, an SF buddy, say, hey, we need to interview more grunts, more guys that were in the thick of it in the GWAT. And so I put it out on X, and I got flooded with people reaching out to me to come on and tell their stories. Well, this man today, Sergeant Tommy James, he did not reach out to me, but he was rogered up by one of his buddies, because obviously him and his story and his commitment to the country had such an impact on his buddy that he felt like it would be an incredible opportunity for my audience, all of you, to hear Sergeant James' story. So without further ado, it is a great privilege and honor to welcome you to the show, Tommy. God bless you, buddy.
Thank you, David.
Okay. Here's what I want to know. Let's just start from the beginning. Describe what was the allure. What was the thing that brought you into the Marine Corps, and why the Marines?
Well, the way I've always looked at it, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to put in my all. And I chose the Marine Corps because everybody else says, oh, I almost joined the Marine Corps and all these things, and I didn't want to be an almost guy. If I do anything, I do it to the best of my abilities. It don't matter what it is. We're cleaning the toilet. That toilet's going to be spit shine clean. It don't matter. Whatever I do, I try to do to the best of my abilities and put in 100% every time.
Did you learn that growing up? I mean, where are you from originally?
I was born in Oklahoma City, but we moved to Arkansas right after the federal building got bombed in 96. And that's what they used to call me in boot camp. And coming up, they always said, Arkansas, get in step. Yeah. Over the loudspeaker. I was a guide in boot camp and all that. I went to MCRD.
Yeah.
Because I'm west of the Mississippi here in Arkansas. And, I've had an accent my whole life, and it's just kind of followed me and, around. Well,
that's what I always remember. I always remember the guys from Arkansas, Oklahoma, right? Mississippi, Alabama, like everybody who had those thick Southern accents. It was like you were a magnet for the instructors, right? They heard you talk, and then it was just pile on time.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So tell me what year you went in, and what was the reason why you wanted to join? Was it 9/11? Was it a family thing? Had people served before you? What was the real catalyst that it was like, you know what? I'm going to go serve my country.
The thing for me is my dad, he served in the Army in Vietnam and all. He was older dad, he was born in 43. So mm-hmm. I went in the Marine Corps in 2006, and I got out from active duty in 2011. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing that, drove me was whenever I was whenever I was in high school, I'll never forget the day, when everything stopped, the whole world stopped. And in every class, they was playing, the news.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to watch them planes, steer right into them buildings and all this, I immediately wanted to do something. Of course, I'd never been in JROTC or any of that stuff like that. But from that day, I just said, it'd be awesome if I could do something, to help protect our country.
I love it. Now, when you decided to go into the recruiters, did you know right away it was the Marine Corps, or did you have that little itch because your dad served in the Army that you're like, oh, I'm going to keep the tradition going? Or did you want to break that cycle? And it was, as everybody always says, it was those damn uniforms that sucked me in.
Well, to be honest with you, I knew nothing about the military or the uniforms or anything prior to me joining or even speaking to a recruiter, because I didn't even speak to a recruiter till 2 or 3 years after I got out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so none of that really swayed it. My dad would talk about it some, but he didn't just press in, pressing us to join the military. I have 2 brothers, that lived and come up with me. And it's just something that I felt like, I wanted to do. And if I was going to go into any service, it was going to be the hardest one,
Absolutely. Tell me the path. So went to MCRD. Was it summer of 06 or fall? What period of time did you go into boot camp?
I went to boot camp in October of 2006.
Okay.
So, it was getting towards winter, and we come out, I believe 5 January of 07 is when we graduated. I was, about 2 weeks in, we went to Pugil Sticks, and I didn't know this till after I graduated, and the drill instructor come and talked to me and my dad and said, do you know why I made you the guide? And I'm like, no idea. And he said, well, it's because in Pugil Sticks, you kick so much ass, they had to drag you off there. And I was just like, I didn't even remember it,
Yeah.
And, but that, he made a big impression on me, that drill instructor that chose me to be the guide. And ironically enough, when I got back from Afghanistan and was back stateside I had about 5-6 months left on my contract, I went to the golf course one day. We go to tee up, and who is it that I'm paired up with? My drill instructor from boot camp.
That's awesome. That's so awesome.
I immediately knew it was him whenever he, spoke and he introduced himself and said, hey, I'm, so-and-so. And I'm like, man, that voice sounds so familiar. And then the more I looked at him, about the 3rd hole, he comes to me because I obviously made an impression on him. And he said, was you one of my recruits? And I said, I was, because I didn't know where he's at in his career at that time. It's 5 years later.
Wow.
And all this. And so that was pretty cool to 5 years down the road out of nowhere, get paired up with one of my drill instructors, that made a lasting impression on me. That was cool to me,
Oh my God. Same for me. I mean, I ended up, my first platoon, in our sister platoon, I think there were 3 guys that were instructors when I went through BUDS that were in that platoon. And that was really cool to see, that ability to how the ideas, the training just keeps passing down through the generations and what that means, right? To come up in the ranks and then they have the opportunity then to give back as an instructor is such a powerful impact. And in particular within the Corps, when you were in boot camp, what were some of the things that really stood out to you in terms of the training, the attitude, or the camaraderie that you felt with the guys going through with you?
Well, I didn't have a clue of what to expect before I went to boot camp. I didn't look anything up, before that. I never been an athlete or anything, and I just went in blind and didn't have a clue what was coming up. But after about a month or so, I figured out, that half of this stuff is mind games. I would see them. We'd be, marching a chow or this or that. And, I would see them always pull their cover off and look in their hat or in their cover, and they had a schedule in there. And I figured it out real quick. We're going to play some games if we're early and we got some time before we have to go to our next event. But it was slam packed. I mean, every day there was multiple things to do for 13 weeks. There was never a day where we just sat around the squad bay, and played the Scrub Brush 500. So it was just always something every day. Before that, I'd never even shot with iron sights or anything like that. And I was lucky enough to be prior to where they went to ACOGs and all that. Mm-hmm. And it taught a lot, on really good instructions on shooting and all that. Before I just looked through the crosshairs and, that's all I knew, Right. I never even shot a pistol before, which I didn't shoot a pistol till later on, but it was just deer hunting, rifles, and shotguns. I did a lot of duck hunting whenever I was younger, and I love shooting them ducks.
Well, that's awesome. It's funny. You raw dogged the Marine Corps. Like you didn't look anything up. You didn't have any expectations. You just went in and you went in hard. And I think that's for me, what was always the amazing thing. In that 13 weeks, the Marine Corps produces, in my opinion, probably the greatest basic troop, right? Without any other training, you could take that group of young Marines and you could put them into war. And that's because that training is so efficient. The mindset is so, and the indoctrination is so well seated. And I think that's really what the unique aspect of it is. Was there a time in that 13 weeks that you really kind of felt a shift? You felt that, you felt that real deep connection to becoming a Marine, right? Did it happen quickly? Did it happen in the middle? Did it happen at the end?
Well, for me, it happened in the second month when we went from MCRD up to Pendleton for Crucible Week. Mm-hmm. And that was just kind of the pinnacle for me, going 3 days without eating, and humping so many miles and miles up and down them mountains at Pendleton. It was just me watching all these other people fall out, can't keep up. And I'm just like, I keep pushing. I'm on the drill instructor's butt, and look back and it's just strung out like a big slinky, and I'm just like, let's go, and that's where I really got motivated. And I realized that it wasn't really hard for me to stay up there and do the things that was real hard for a lot of the other guys. And it's almost like it was natural for me, and that's whenever I really knew, whenever we completed that Crucible and got to go to the chow hall by ourselves, and I got more than 23 seconds to eat a meal. Because as a guide, you're the last person in. And as soon as the first recruit stands up, you're done. So it was many meals that I didn't even get a bite. I'd go to sit down and the first dude got up. No, I'd be so mad at him.
For the audience who doesn't know what Tommy's talking about, as the guide, you basically keep the entire formation in step. You keep everything. Did you carry the colors?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
sir.
So, and what everybody needs to understand is that this is one of the most historically admired positions in the history of the Corps. This is the guy that carries the flag, that keeps everybody in time as you march into battle, right? It's it's the symbolism that is attached to that individual is as deep as the legacy of the Marine Corps itself. And so to be able to get that honor is a really, really huge thing for anybody in going through boot camp. When you graduated, talk a little bit about that graduation ceremony and what was it like to, get the globe and anchors?
Man, it was awesome for me. I mean, obviously I was the guide, so I was the only one in the whole platoon, 123 guys, that got to graduate in his dress blues. So that was back before, they started letting everybody wear their blues. So everybody else was in camis. No, hold on, Charlies. They were in Charlies, and I was the only one in full dress blues. And I got meritoriously promoted straight out of boot camp, because I was a platoon honorman as well.
Wow.
And being able to march, on that parade deck at San Diego was listening to they always said march to the beat of the drum. And it took me a long time to figure out what he was even talking about. I'd nenever, had to march or do anything like that. And, they kept screaming, march to the beat of the drum, get in step, Arkansas. And, it was after about the fourth or fifth practice or whatever you want to call it, getting ready for the ceremony, that I actually learned what he was talking about. When that drum hits your left foot needs to be hitting the ground. Mm-hmm. But me standing up there with 5 other Marines and retiring the guide on and all that, it was pretty good, pretty cool, pretty special, and when I got that Eagle Globe and Anchor pinned on me on that day, I felt like I really accomplished something.
Oh, I bet.
Life.
Yeah, that's so cool, man. There's so much folklore attached to the Marine Corps, right? From all the way back to the Barbary Wars. It's funny, a buddy of mine that is a current MARSOC intel officer up at Pendleton and reservist, and when we worked together at the agency, he got a chance to be in Libya and go to where the Barbary Wars, where the Marines that are still buried over there are. And he did this etching on one of the gravestones. And, you look at that, you look at Belleau Wood, the Devil Dogs, you look at the Battle of Tarawa, you look at Iwo Jima, you look at Khe Sanh, right? You look at Fallujah, you look at El Anbar, right? You look at Marja Push in 2009, and it's continuously the core that Rogers up and goes deep into the heart of the enemy's mind, right? Because you bring the fight to them. When you left boot camp, where did you go, and how did the pride continue to build inside of you with your service?
Well, whenever I left boot camp, I went to 3 weeks of, I was basically training you how to deploy, because of course we was in the middle of the fight, and it was called Marine Corps training. And it was 3 more weeks of additional combat training that we went to. And out of that, I went to Fort Leonard Wood for military police school. And I done 9 weeks of training there. And whenever we got ready to graduate that military police school, about a week or two before, they took the top 5% of the class and asked them, if they want to go to K9 school to learn how to be a military working dog handler. And you had to fill out some, questionnaires and stuff, basically submit an application to it. And I called one of my good buddies, Rick Staggs, that, I grew up with, and he went to the Marine Corps about a year ahead of me. And he was a military police officer too, but he was a field MP. He got to deploy to Iraq immediately after he got out of MP school almost. So he already had deployment under his belt. And I called him up. He's at Lejeune. And I said, hey, man, they're asking if I want to go to K9 school. What do I tell him? He said, hell yeah, you do. He said, them dudes in Iraq, the K9 had it made. They got an air conditioned hut when they was back on base and everything else. And we're out here sleeping under these tents. And he said, you want to be a K9 handler? You know? So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to submit a package and see where it goes. So I left Fort Leonard Wood and went to San Diego at Lackland Air Force Base. Mm-hmm. And I had another 3.5 months of training there, you know, in military working dog school. And it was crazy to me when I got there. It took about 3 to 4 weeks before I could even get picked up in a class. And so we're just sitting in the barracks doing, you know, whatever the local staff wants us to do, just doing crap work and all. Yeah. And finally get picked up, and there's like 3 or 4 Marines in the class, but it's mixed services. You know, we got Air Force, Navy, Army, and Marines, but the Marine Corps was the only service where a Marine can come straight through out of his training and go to K9 school. Every other service, Army, Navy, and Air Force, you had to do a full, you know, enlistment of 4 years. And then you could request that as kind of like a B billet is what we called it in Marine Corps. You could request a B billet and come to K9 school. But Marines were the only service that could go straight through because obviously we were a different breed, you know. So
well, your military bearing is definitely, I should say, your military bearing when you're not on leave is exceptional.
Yeah. That's right.
So, all right. So you're in K9 school. You go through that. You graduate. What happened next?
Well, straight out of K9 school, I get orders to Quantico, Virginia. Mm-hmm. So I go to, I get a couple of days leave, go home, and actually, see, that was one of the things that my recruiter straight up lied to me about. You know, whenever he got me to sign that 5-year contract, I was like, hey, you know, am I going to be able to have my vehicle? And they said, oh, yeah, man, you got like a year of training. You know, you can take your motorcycle, your vehicle, and all that straight up there with you. And of course, you know, I figured out real quick that he was full of shit, you know. So I come back home and I actually get my motorcycle and my truck and move to Quantico, Virginia. And that place was awesome because we got to do a lot of training on the west side of base with the FBI and CIA, and we're in the middle of everything up there. You know, it was that base was so big. And, you know, we just, every week it was something else. You know, the FBI guys and the CIA guys, they was always calling, you know, trying to coordinate training activities and stuff together. So I got to do a lot of that, which a lot of other Marines, you know, wouldn't never got to experience, you know, unless they were stationed at Quantico and was in certain groups, you know, that they always wanted to train with the dogs. And when I got assigned there, when I first showed up, it was me and a buddy of mine, Joseph Mendoza. He's a master sergeant now. He stayed in. Mm-hmm. And last I seen, he was in Hawaii, stationed there with one of the other guys that was stationed with us in Quantico. We show up there, we go to PMO and was like, you know, what do we do? And they said, well, there's only one open dog, because another guy that became a buddy of mine, Sergeant Paldino, he was getting out. Mm-hmm. And it was this 130-pound Czech Shepherd that had like 32 unauthorized bites, you know, and was just a complete, you know. He would just fight and attack out of nowhere. And, you know, just this dude had massive paws and everything else. They're like, he's the only open dog, and otherwise you're going to have to go to PMO and go to the road. And I was like, well, shit, hell, I'll handle him. I don't want to go. I don't want to be a regular cop. You know, I want to, you know, be on leash straight, you know, right off the bat. Yeah. And me and Donnie Paldino got together, and, you know, and he's told me, you know, what he does and, you know, what to watch for and this and that. Cause that's something, he was smart too. I'm talking a straight up Houdini. The first week I handled him, he broke out of his kennel and come into the office and cleared the whole son bitch out. And I mean, there were people standing on top of desks. He's like, get your dog, get your dog. And he just come to the desk I was sitting at and crawled up under my feet and laid down, because Donnie's like, man, you're going to have to put in a lot of extra time and work, to gain trust. And so he, one of the other things with handling Santo, he was non-deployable because he had hip dysplasia. And he was already an old dog. It was Santo Echo 050. He's actually in the Marine Corps Museum now.
No.
Because I remember when we first got there, they was, just putting all that stuff together. And whenever I got out or whenever I PCS'd, nobody else would handle them,
Yeah.
So there's only, in that case, if nobody wants to adopt a dog whenever he gets ready to retire, the only other option is he gets euthanized.
Right.
So my kennel master there, reached out to the Marine Corps Museum and asked them, if they wanted him to be in there. So that was and I didn't know that till years later, but about a year into my stay there at Quantico, another school come up, another training opportunity, and it was called Specialized Search Dog School. It was 6 months of training, and I got to go back down to San Antonio to Lackland. So another 6 weeks at Lackland. Of course, this time I'm out of the fleet, and I could stay at the, the hotel there and, have my own vehicle. And, it was a straight up party, dude.
I did my paramedic refresher time in San Antonio for 3 months, and I'll tell you what, that place is definitely a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, a lot of fun, a lot of good memories there. And so the reason why I wanted to go there because I was non-deployable handling Santos, and we only had 6 dogs there at Quantico. So you wasn't getting, them dogs were like equipment, they was a number. You just didn't get a new dog unless something happened, he died or retired, something happened. You wasn't going to get a new dog. So the chances of me deploying was 0. So that's why when that other school came up, I was like, hell yeah, I want to do that, and I knew that I'd be put in the field then. Whenever I got through with that training, I would PCS to either Lejeune or Okinawa or Pendleton and be in a deployable unit. And that's what made it so good for me going, is I knew that there was no way I wasn't going to get in a fight after I got done with that. Of course, I had no idea what SSD dogs was whenever they asked if we wanted to go to the course. I asked a couple buddies of mine and, and figured it out. And I was like, yeah, you want to do that because you're going to go to a field unit and, you're going to get in a fight and go get some. So I done that 6 months there at San Antonio, came back, and it wasn't even 10 days after I went back to Quantico. I already had orders to Pendleton.
Oh, wow.
So that was a 3,000-mile journey from Quantico, Virginia to Camp Pendleton, California.
I made that one a few times myself.
Yeah, that's not something you could do in more than in less than 3 days, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. So you go back out to Pendleton. What unit did you go with? And then what was your job at that moment? And what timeline were you on? What year was it? What month was it? Where was the GWAT in Iraq and Afghanistan at that time?
So I show up to Pendleton in December of 2008. And so I'm a couple years in, and I'd already picked up corporal whenever I was in SSD school and it was one of the things that them other guys couldn't believe. Is like, can he pick up, corporal? Can he be an NCO in training? And, it was cool that I had a cousin that was one of the instructors there that I didn't even know was a cousin until I went back and, he was a Corporal James. Well, he was there in the first deployment or first time I went. That's when I first found out about him because a lot of the other guys was giving him shit saying, who's this other James? And he calls his mom and puts her on the phone and he starts asking me, are you related to this guy, and this guy? And I'm just like, yes, no. And then she's just like, yeah, we're kin. And, so of course, my first 3 months there in that military working dog school, we talk and, a little bit, but I'm straight, I'm fresh, I'm still a boot to them, so he doesn't give me any special treatments, but we get to know each other a little bit. And there's another exciting moment that happened in that first 3 months. They called it the Battle of Chaparral. And it was, we had about 23 Marines between K-9 school and correction school, because corrections went there too. Mm-hmm. And we was that first military working dog school, it was like the rest of the training before, we were still treated like, not recruits, but we'd march to the chow hall on Thursdays, and ate chow and then come back, did field day and all that. It was still strict. You couldn't have vehicles, no liberty, off base, on the weekends, that kind of stuff. But the tension started building up. Going to chow it was like a DLC or it was a bunch of Army folks that would join the military, but if they didn't know English, they'd send them to Lackland so they can learn English and all that. And it's like 140 of them.
Wow.
And we're marching to chow every week and the tension just starts rising because they get real close to our ranks. And, one time they cut us off and the master guns that was at Lackland at the time was the most senior enlisted master guns in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
So he's salty. I was in his office one day and he was dipping and he was spitting in his coffee cup. And it was the morning and I see him, I was like, well, maybe that's just a spitter. So I see him go over to the trash can and he dumps that dip spit out and then puts it under the coffee pot and gets a cup of coffee and, goes to drinking. I was like, wow, this hardcore salty, man.
That is salt. That's pure salt. That's awesome.
I've never seen somebody do that stuff before. I took an accidental, sip of dip spit before and turned green and puked my guts out. Yeah. And this dude just pouring it out in the trash can and, pouring straight black coffee in there, and, he's hard, and this stuff starts building up and finally Master Gun shows up and it gets through the detachment there, it's just about 9 or 10 staff Marines stationed there, and then just the training personnel and they see it building up. And so Master Guns comes with us and marches to chow and they gave us a little pep talk before we went, said, hey, if they try to march in our ranks or anything, this is the day. We're going to let them know it ain't happening. We're Marines. And so we go to chow, everything's fine on the way there. We don't see them. But when we're marching back to the barracks, coming back, here they are. We're, getting ready to make a column right onto the little boulevard and march back to our barracks. And they're in a column left. And I'm up front, calling cadence and all, because of course we had you had to have guides that marched them, the instructors and stuff. They didn't do that. They always had somebody assigned to do that. Mm-hmm. And they march into our ranks and they got about one person deep and I yelled, fall out. And it was a huge battle, dude. I'm talking. Dude, we go to swinging and kicking and it was crazy. People like Master Guns was over there, just kept tapping on the shoulders, dodging blows and everything. And then, the instructors are trying to stay out of the fight. Was 23 Marines out against over 100 of them. And there ended up being a a plaque made behind that, and they called, PMO, and the K9 Marines showed up, the Air Force K9 guys, and we're just laughing. They're like, yeah, send your dog on me. I'll call them off. They didn't know that we were K9 Marines and stuff.
Oh my gosh.
It was a huge thing, man. We took their guide on, and everything. And man, there was 58 of them that went to the hospital. And
oh my God.
Yeah. And I think we had 2 female Marines, and both of them went to the hospital, but that was it out of 23 Marines and all of them. And of course, there's a big investigation behind all that. And about, 4 or 5 days later, I'm in training, and here comes CID. They pick me up. And I'm just like, why are they picking me up? So we get down there, and they start, questioning me and all this. And there's like, we had 14 guys positively identify you as the one, that hit them. And I was just like, so I'm the only one? And they're just like, yeah. I was like, well, how did they identify me? And it was like, off your DOD ID, my CAT card. I'm just like, wow, really? And so I'm in there for a couple hours, and here comes Master Guns. He shows up in there, and I'm thinking, oh shit, my ass is grass.
Yeah.
This ain't gonna be good. Why did not, one of my instructors or something show up? Why did it go straight to the top? Master Guns is here. And he pulls me aside, and he's like, look, son, don't worry about it. I got it. And I was just like, sir, I'm going to take responsibility for my actions. What happens, happens, And he's just like, there's nothing going to happen to you. I promise you that. And that next day, we always had a weekend safety brief. And I got arrested on the 4th day about the 6th day, because it was from Thursday. We're on to the next Thursday. So it's been a week. Whenever they come, and detain me, I didn't get arrested. Well, no, they did put me in cuffs. But anyhow, the next following up Friday, Commandant of the Marine Corps is there, and the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps show up to Lackland because he wants to talk to this group of Marines, because the word spread like wildfire of that battle, that happened. There was blood everywhere. People was on the balconies of the Gateway Inn, videoing and, yelling and stuff. It was pretty entertaining, and word got around, and in the fleet units, they were telling our story, on the weekend safety briefs about, how 23 Marines fought 140 or something. So Army guys, and Commandant and Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps show up, and, they want to talk to me and a couple of other guys, that was, in the unit and everything. And he gives me a challenge coin and all that. And was, man, y'all are, motivating and glad, the esprit de corps is high right now and all that. And Master Guns ended up retiring behind that.
Oh, wow.
Because, they wanted me to go down, and he looked out for me, and he basically saved my career.
Wow.
And he ended up retiring, and of course I'd already graduated. I wasn't far from graduating when all that went down. And they present some of the other instructors that was still there. They had a list of all the Marines on a little plaque, and they had that pike from the guidon that we took from them, and they mounted that on there and said the Battle of Chaparral, and in his retirement, they presented that to him.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I didn't, of course, I had no clue any of this happened until I went back over a year later for SSD school, and I walk in the barracks and look and see this plaque, and I read it. And, of course, my name's plastered up there, PFC James at the time. And I was like, holy shit, I didn't have a clue. Then I asked my cousin, because he was still there. And I called him. I was like, Chris, dude, tell me about this plaque, dude. What's up with that? And, he told me the whole story. And that was pretty cool, for me to show up a year and a half later and be able to tell them guys, that was their, green, coming straight out of boot camp and all, that's me, and tell the story. That was pretty rewarding down the road,
That's like the pinnacle of the Marine Corps, right? It's like you're going to do everything just hard as you can, right? You're going to defend the core, the unit at every stage, right? Whether it's against, meatheads going out and drinking on the weekends, or it's other units that are trying to, flex on you. It's the mentality of the Corps. It's that camaraderie, that brotherhood that can't be broken no matter what. And that just falls in line with, I think, the great allure of the Corps, right? That's why people have such profound respect for it, because they know that you all stick together no matter what. After you finished that, when was your first deployment overseas?
So we finished that, and I get PCS to Pendleton, and then in June of 2010 is whenever that was my first combat deployment. Prior to that, like when I was at Quantico and all, with me being there with non-deployable dogs, I got to do a lot of work with POTUS. So in SOS, I got to do a lot of missions, work with the Secret Service and stuff. We covered the G20 summit. We covered when Bush went to Africa. He went to 4 different countries: Liberia, Tanzania, Ghana, and one other one, maybe Liberia or something. And, so I got to do a lot of TAD stuff like that, for a couple of weeks at a time. They'd always pull me up, and, we had HMX there, which was headquarters of Marine Corps Battalion. They had their own dogs, and they got to do the local DC stuff, searching compounds and buildings, around DC, wherever POTUS was going, or VIPs, period. So I got to do a lot of that stuff, and that was cool. Being able to work with the Secret Service and all that, that was awesome. I gained a lot of respect for them guys. And, of course, they always loved it when a Marine showed up, to work with them, because I didn't know it before then, but probably over 50% of the Secret Service is former Marine Corps.
That's right. Yeah.
So, they get it. They know, right off the bat, and it's instant connection whenever you show up and they're there. So fast forward, I'm in Pendleton now. I'm a corporal when I show up, and they immediately, give me my own, I guess you could call it a fire team or whatever. I get, 6 to 8 guys I'm over, and we start training, and the longer I'm there, the bigger my leadership role gets. And I worked all the way up to chief trainer there. And so I'm training 60 dogs getting ready for a deployment, and we're taking the best 30. We only deploy half the platoon at a time. So that was something else that was way different at Pendleton. I go from 8 dogs in Quantico and show up at Pendleton, and there's 60 dogs there.
Wow.
So it's a lot more going on, and every day you're going to put them dogs on odor, do some basic obedience, do bite work. There's multiple different canine units within the Marine Corps. You got your regular patrol dogs that are on the PMO and patrol with the guys that wear badges and guard the gate and all that. And you have explosive and narcotic dogs in them units. Then we had another unit that just come up as I was coming up through the ranks. It was combat trackers. Mm-hmm. And these dogs were trained to track personnel and bite at the end of it. It was a lot of bite work and stuff in that, and a lot of tracking and that kind of stuff. And then as I was coming up, SSD wasn't even a thing whenever I was in K9 school the first time. And they was few and far between, because SSD dogs were specialized search dogs. And they were mainly Belgian Malinois. We had a couple labs here and there, and very few shepherds. And we did all our training off leash. So when I got to Pendleton, we had just several of the guys that come out of the same training that I went through, Lackland was there with me. And there was like 23 specialized search dogs handlers in the whole Marine Corps. So they were very few and far between. And the SSD guys was kind of the high speed, low drag guys. We got attached with, the SEALs and the recon guys and, force recon, all that. They always put us with, the SF basically. MARSOC wasn't really, it was just coming around back then, and they didn't have any of their own dogs. Me and another buddy of mine, William Suture, we kind of spearheaded that. Matter of fact, he got awarded the Navy Cross.
Oh, wow.
Over there, Billy Suture, they called him. He was working with, I believe that was the first time that we had K9, actual Marine Corps dog handlers attached with MARSOC guys.
Wow.
And he was working with them, and, he showed out one day and, basically doing the same stuff that we do every time we're in the fight. But one of the brass put him up, and, he got awarded, and I was really proud of him for that. That was awesome.
Amazing. Yeah, that honor is just people. It's extreme, and to be able to, serve your country at that level, man, is just a whole nother level of courage, right? So, all right. So you train. You're at this elite level of the dogs. You're working with a bunch of guys. When did you find out you were going to Afghanistan? And because you got there in June 2010, and so the big Marja push had happened at the fall of 2009 into 2010. That's when Kyle Carpenter got hit, and during all that time, I was actually in South Central Afghanistan working for the agency, and just listening to the daily reports of all the Marines in Marja just getting lit up, doing daylight overt patrols, when ROEs that are basically, hand tying you guys from actively engaging the enemy. What was that like knowing you're going into that environment?
Well, and I don't know why it is, but you'll never meet a Marine that wasn't just itching and dying to get over there and get in a fight. A lot of people ask me, even since I've been out, man, was you scared? Were you afraid of dying? And I said, absolutely not. There's like, what do you mean you wasn't afraid? I said, because Marines don't die. Our spirits live forever. There's always going to be stories told, about these legendary Marines and, what they did. And that's that esprit de corps, your legacy lives forever, and
right.
Stuff like that, and you just, whenever stuff popped off, everybody else would retreat. Of course, Marines were running toward the sound of fire, so that was always, kept me motivated and everything like that, doing that. But showing up, we get there around the 1st of June. And of course, for y'all probably didn't have to do it, but almost every other Marine that shows up to Afghanistan, you get 2 weeks of, what do you call it? It's, getting used to the heat and all that kind of stuff. I forget what they call it. And about the week and a half in, they tell us, because we show up there with 30 dog teams, and then we get separated out. We're IAs on different units all over, so your individual augmentees with different, units. And, our senior leadership would always, put the, certain guys with certain, units, that he knew they would, excel in. So about a week and a half into being at Afghanistan, I find out that I'm going to be attached with 1st Recon Battalion, and they're out of Pendleton too. And so we go up there, and I'm kind of one of the leaders now, having trained all these Marines, to come up and all that. So I'm one of the spokespersons, you may say. I was always go around to different units and, familiarize ourselves and introduce, and let them know, hey, we're force multipliers here to help, where do y'all need us the most? And they put me with force recon. They had, they still had a force recon battalion because they'd cut them out there for a little bit and they brought them back, and I'm pretty sure that was the last deployment that a force company got to deploy. And then after that, they was, like whenever I got back from Afghanistan, I was being forced to join MARSOC, and they were trying to force all the other guys, the force recon guys, they was, trying to force them to just join MARSOC. They was kind of trying to downsize the Marine Corps, at that time. And, you had to meet certain requirements to be able to re-enlist and stay in and all that. But they put me with force company, and my first day out in the fight was June 16th. Mm-hmm. So I'm about 2 weeks in, and I meet these guys, and when I show up to meet these guys, it was kind of different because I show up there and I'm not Sergeant James when I get there. I'm just Tommy. And, the captain and all that, he's not, sir, this or that, he's just John, and this 24 guys and, first name basis. And, that was awesome. Being there with these guys. We had, I think, like 12 or 13 snipers in the platoon.
Wow.
It was a stacked group of guys, and first day in, we show up and we are what spearheaded what they called Operation New Dawn. And it's a little different. They had Operation New Dawn in Iraq that I later, found out about. And we were Operation New Dawn. That's what they called our first mission out, for the first time we went out. We stayed out in the field for 30 days. We moved every 4 days. We would just go take these compounds, 4 o'clock in the morning, our hands were tied. We couldn't, do many hard knocks and none of that. Wasn't able to do a lot of that high speed, low drag stuff that recon guys and stuff get to do. We were just, trying to do what we can. Every 4 days, we're moving compounds, and we couldn't knock on their doors till 4 o'clock in the morning. We'd wake them up, and it was so crazy. We're in a country with no electricity, no running water, living in mud huts. And 3 hours after we knock on somebody's door, the Taliban knows we're there and we're in a tick. It's just crazy. They had these dadgum Nokias like they come out with in the early 2000s, and that was their new phones. And how they had cell phone service over there still blows my mind, that they had cell phone service, to be able to communicate, but we didn't have running water, none of that crap, So first day in, we went there and, get briefed. They're like, we're going to set up the SNAP VCP on this main route that a lot of the high ranking Taliban, officials are using. So we show up there, we insert about 3 o'clock in the morning, kilo insert, and we go set up our VCP point. And basically, we had one irrigation ditch. It was about, 8 foot wide and probably 10 foot deep, but it's not deep in water. So, and there's a little berm there. And later find out that we're the ones that dug all the irrigation ditches in the 80s there, and for them to be able to farm and stuff. So we're on the banks of this irrigation ditch, kind of spread out, and the captain and the gunnery sergeant Moss, I believe he just got out. Brian Moss, he was the gunny in my force recon group of guys, and they're the ones that's up there, actually stopping the people. Mm-hmm. And we're thinking we're going to have a bunch of people come through here and, going to be able to talk to them. They had to terp with them, to all that. And this dude rides up on a moped about 20 minutes after daylight. And they talk to him. And of course, he says he's nothing and blah, blah, blah. And he drives off. And not even 10 minutes after that, we're in a tick.
Yeah.
And now we're surrounded. We figure out real quick that they got snipers set up in every location. How they get intel that we're going to show up in these places is crazy to me. You can't, like, everybody over there, you don't know who's Taliban and who's not. They all wear the same clothes, and you're just telling them apart. It's not like fighting an enemy like another military unit, because they're all wearing man dresses and, they might have an EK under the man dress or AK under the man dress or not. Who knows? So first day in, we get pinned down by these snipers. And it's all day affair, dude. We're just on these, irrigation ditches. We're calling in air support. We didn't get air support to around chow time, 12 o'clock before we got our first air support. And, so they, showed up and dropping hellfire and, took out a couple of the snipers. And, then there's this other little half of a mud hut. It had about 3-foot walls on it. Behind the irrigation ditch that we was pinned down on, all our guys were spread out along that ditch on both sides of them. And captain comes on the radio and it's like, "Hey, James, can you go clear that compound so we can get some better cover and, reassess, our situation and all that." So it was pretty sweet. I got to send my dog, that was one of the high speed, low drag things. I could send my dog off leash where 99% of the other dog handlers in all the military are on a 6-foot leash or 30-foot retractable leash.
Yep.
All my work's off drag. My dog has radios on her. I got the mic and I'm, little microphone. I'm giving her commands, over her radios and have her search that whole thing. And, all I had was a little about 10-foot opening, that I sent her in. And I had her, kind of cross that, several times, smelling and, searching for explosives. And then I send her, she knew my specialized search dogs know directions and everything. So I could stop her, send her left, send her right, send her forward, bring her back. That was what made the specialized search dog so elite. And, that was, no other military working dogs done that, only the specialized search dogs. So I cleared it, and then, I run out there, and I got a spotter everywhere. With being a dog handler, I'm going to have a spotter because my eyes are, obviously on the dog, watching her behavior and all that. And I always have a guy, right beside me that he's my eyes and ears. So me and my spotter go and, actually enter the compound, and by around time sun's going down, the rest of the platoon finally made movement over there, and then we regrouped. And so it's an all day affair, that day one,
day one. Yeah. Not even like a warm up, a shake out, nothing. Right into
it. Straight into it, We do several little recon things. They, about the middle of the day, they asked me, they come over the radio, "Hey, James, you think you can go clear us a route to these compounds over here to the south?" And, so we can, take the fight to them. And, so me and 3 other Marines, we're walking down this ditch, searching. I'm with the dog. I'm searching this and that. And, we did that and then come back, and of course, it's 140 degrees up there.
People don't understand. People can't even fathom the heat. It's out of control.
Oh man, it's crazy.
And what the dogs do? How did you keep the dog engaged in that level heat?
Well, I carried double the water from everybody else. Of course, I carried my whole load, my whole gear list, just like the rest of the platoon, and I had to carry all her food and all her water with me as well. So we got allotted. I got 1 gallon a day and she got 1 gallon a day. And, so the Marine Corps dog handlers, we get so much training, man. Like leading up to the deployment, we're basically vet techs when we get ready to deploy. We get a lot of training with the vets. We get to work with a lot of other agencies, all the 3-letter guys. We work with all them dudes. They put us on HME when we on our pre-deployment training. Work with HEF out there in Yuma, Arizona. They had mount towns and all that set up there, which that's another, hellhole, But yeah, they teach us, they train us, to learn the signs, all 3 of the signs of, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and heat stress and heat stroke, in our dog, and be able to tell, when they're getting too hot. And, that's one of the biggest reasons why the first 2 weeks when you get there, they make us acclimate to the weather.
Yeah.
So for 2 weeks, we had to just do basic obedience out in the weather, full gear, dogs in full gear. And for the first 2 weeks, you get your dog acclimated to the weather over there. And over time, they get used to it, and are able to withstand the heat.
What was the name of your dog, and how long had you been operating with that dog prior to leaving?
So whenever I show up to Pendleton, I have a dog named Mecky that is a little low, about 55, 60 pound Belgian Mal that I trained. It was when we're in SSD school, you get assigned 2 dogs when you show up there, and you're training 2 dogs the whole time you're there, and then at the end of the training, the best dog out of the 2 gets assigned to you. And unlike the rest of the military working dogs, if you get assigned an SSD dog, that's your property. If you PCS to Pendleton, she's going with you. You move to, Lejeune, that dog's going with you. No other dog handlers in any of the military for that, for that, nobody else. Like when you go to a base, you just got assigned a dog at that base, and that dog lived at that base its whole life, except for the specialized search dogs, because it took so much more rapport to, train them dogs. So I show up with Mecky, and there's another guy there, Chris Beatty. He was one of the few Israel SSD handlers. They sent some select guys over there to Tel Aviv. And instead of going to Lackland for their 6 weeks of training, they went to Tel Aviv and got to work with the Israeli guys, on specialized work dogs, search dogs. And they got to, learn the real training, over there. Their hands wasn't tied by the moms of America, like it was in the fleet everywhere else. They got to really train a dog. They didn't ask a dog to do something. They told it, and they was going to learn it one way or another, but so I show up there with Mecky, and he's an okay dog, but he's just not great. He was green when I got him, and Staff Sergeant Beatty was in the process of getting out. And so there's only so many SSD handlers at each base. And so I get assigned with Rona, Kilo 458. That was my dog. Her name was Rona. She's about a 55, 60 pound Belgian Malinois. She'd already been on 2 deployments to Iraq with Beatty. Wow. So she was teaching me a lot of stuff, because whenever we showed up on base, when we was in Lackland, we couldn't use, e-collars and a lot of that stuff. You had to, food reward and high praise stuff training. But when we showed up to the fleet, that's when the training really started.
Right.
So I get assigned with Rona about a month or 2 after I get to Pendleton. And that's when we start building our rapport and getting ready for the deployment. So that was, go ahead.
All right. So you get in, go in country, get attached to that force platoon. Day one, it's kinetic. You're getting into it. Did it maintain that pace, that time, that level of engagement through your whole deployment?
Well, the whole time I was with Force Company, it did. We stayed out that first time. Of course, Force, they would always put us in the hottest places and stuff like that. We was we were lucky for that because we got to stay in the fight. I mean, every day it was multiple ticks, you know. You always knew you was going to get in a tick, and then, you know, there'd be a break where they would pray, you know, 13 times a day or whatever, you know, and then after they got through, you know, it starts again, you know, it starts with the small arms and all that. And
yeah,
so he was out for about 30 days the first time. And of course, you know, none of us shaved and all that. So whenever I show back up to Camp Leatherneck, and I didn't know it at the time, I show up in country as a corporal, and we stay out for 30 days. And then I go back to the Camp Leatherneck to our kennels there that was set up at Leatherneck. And everybody thinks I'm a Terp at first because I'm full beard, you know, hair, you know, grown out for 30 days, you know. They're just like, some of the guys are just looking at me like, what's this Terp doing in our kennels, you know? And, then some of the guys was, you know, calling me Sergeant once they figured out, you know, who I was. You know, they started calling me Sergeant James. I was like, what the hell was, you know, I hadn't been promoted that I know of. You know, at that time, you know, you only got promoted by composite scores, and, you know, they had the level so high, you know, they wasn't looking to promote many, you know, corporals to sergeant.
Right.
And finally I figured out, you know, I asked Willie, I said, hey, you know, why is some of these guys, you know, calling me sergeant? You know, Willie was a staff sergeant that was the kennel master that deployed with us. And we were, you know, good buddies by this time. And like, what's going on? He's just like, oh shit, you hadn't heard? I'm like, no. He's like, man, you got meritoriously promoted. He said, you need to go down to the MEF and take a promotion picture. And I was like, what? I was like, well, can I go just like this? They're like, you know, you can't, dude. You got to shave and, you know, go get a haircut and all that shit. You know, I was like, man, that'd be so awesome if I got to take a promotion pic, full beard, you know, and they wouldn't let me do that.
That's so funny. Something similar happened to me too. My summer 2002, my first trip to Afghanistan, my only combat deployment in the teams, and we got like this unsung hero thing. We went and met the general from SOCOM, and you know, I was at SEAL Team 1, and they call it No Fun 1, and you know, I had the beard was out to here, the hair was long, you know. And they looked at us and they're like, go get your starch camis on, shave your face, cut your hair. And we showed up, and it was funny. Every other unit, the SF unit that was getting recognized, the two guys, you know, long hair beards. The Mars, you know, was a force guys. They look, you know, they were out and doing it. And then the Air Force, JTAC guys that had been there for like 9 months at the time, they had like ZZ Top beards. They were wearing cutoff BDUs and like Tivas. And I'm like, this sucks, man. But I feel you when you got to get, you got your good combat flow going, and you got to get all trimmed up, man. That's funny.
Yeah. That was, you know, whenever I first got back, you know, of course, I hadn't had a shower in over a month, you know. Yeah. A lot of people don't understand, you know, when you deploy, you know, there's not just bathrooms and shower huts everywhere, you know. When you're a Marine, you know, Marines are out in the field the whole time. You know, we don't get none of that luxury of coming back to a big fob every day, you know, and being able to take a shower and all that. So, but I got squared away, and, you know, then hell, all the guys was forced to, you know, figured it out already before I even knew about it, you know, and so there's like, hey man, let me come to your ceremony and all that. And so we did all that crap. It was cool. And
that's cool.
You know,
that's really
cool. Going back out the second time, you know, we didn't helo insert the second time. We took VIX out. And I don't know why we took VIX out, because once we got to that little fob that we was going to, we parked them there, and we never got in the sumbitches again. You know, got ready to leave. You know, so I'm thinking, why do we even drag these out here and have to, you know, deal with all this, you know, if we're not going to actually use them, you know? But that's the Marine Corps for you. If it makes sense, we're going to do the complete opposite. You know?
Just to keep you honest, just to keep you hard, right?
They're going to keep you on your toes. You know, every time you left, whatever little PB you were at, or little compound you're at, them irrigation ditches was everywhere over there. We're in Helmand province. So we're almost in the middle of the country, and these irrigation ditches are everywhere. So as soon as you leave, your feet are getting wet because, of course, we don't travel over bridges or walkways or nothing. We're going, try to jump these ditches, which was hell, wearing nods, and especially when you got a dog attached to you. Oh. So every time I was ready to jump, she wasn't, and vice versa. And I woke up in the middle of the ditch most of the times. Crawl out on my hands and knees. Yeah. It was because you could never judge the distance. I'm thinking, when you first walk up to it, man, this ditch is only 1.5 feet, 2 feet wide. I'm just going to jump it. And you go to jump it and you realize when you're about 6 foot across that you're not at the other side. You're in the bottom now, and feet's wet every time. 30 minutes from leaving, feet are soaking wet. So your wet feet, hold that gum, patrol, and then coming back, of course, you're going to get your feet wet, right before you go back in.
That's right.
So that was every day, so it's miserable. You're only carrying, a couple pairs of camis in your, rucksack, and then, as many socks as you can stuff in there, 6, 7, 8 pairs. And, that was just part of it, and I always had, 50 pounds on average extra weight on top of me because, of course, I got to carry my dog's food, my dog's water, and, the same gear list as all the rest of the guys. And, of course, they spread out, the stuff for the Barrett and all that. So I might have 2 or 3 mags in my ruck too, and, we always get spread out the load, So.
How long did you go out another 30 days on that second?
It was about 45 days that second go around.
Wow.
And we had it wasn't near as kinetic as the first push we went out, but, it was still, we got at least 1 to 2 ticks a day. It was always, something every day. And we done all our movement at night. We done very few patrols during the day. We would always patrol at night and do, or knocks, or soft knocks, at 4 o'clock in the morning. They had our hands tied. We couldn't just rush in. We did get to do a couple hard knocks. That was sweet. That was when the real fun, went down. It's nothing like doing a, hard knock going in, 2 o'clock in the morning. They don't expect it, and,
That's right.
You just, you got the element of surprise at that point, the rest of the time, they see it coming, they expect it, because they always knew where we were at, 2 or 3 hours after we showed up, if not sooner. Who knows?
Yeah. What was the feeling in the Corps during that time with those ROEs? Why was there frustration? Now, obviously, because you're with force, you're getting to move at night. You don't have to do overt daylight stuff. What was the greater sense within the Corps about how constraining the ROEs were, and what was that mood like throughout?
Man, it was like having your damn hands tied behind your back. You could not engage first. You had to be, declare troops in contact before we can even engage the enemy. You don't know who's who. So we're just out there on our, toes and, heads on a swivel the whole time because you don't know who's who everywhere. And it was, it was frustrating. A lot of times, we would look and, get this intel, intel would come in headquarters, it's like, hey, y'all need to go check this out, this and this. But of course, you can't engage, going in the door, they have to engage you, and the crazy thing about me, I walk point my whole deployment, everywhere we go, no discrepancy on where I'm at, I'm going to be point man, So of course, that didn't bother me. That's what I was trained to do. And that's what I wanted to do. And, so anytime you was point man, especially with the K9, you had a bigger target on your head,
Absolutely.
I was the one walking around with a target, and anytime we got into a tick, the bullets was always flying at me first. because they realize, if I got a dog, I'm a force multiplier. I'm the one finding all their IEDs and, all that, and, keeping them from being able to, take mass casualties on us and everything. I was, always the one that all the eyes were on me, and all the training that we went through leading up to the deployment, they got you mentally and physically ready for it.
Yeah.
It was no doubt,
Did you guys take any casualties during that deployment?
Well, that first time we went out, we had no casualties whatsoever. The second time we went out, one of our guys that's in the platoon, he was a sergeant at the time, Sergeant Rowland, and he took a shot. I believe it was the first patrol we went out on. The second mission we went out on, we went to go take this compound, and we're taking this compound 4:00 in the morning. We do our knock and everything. Nobody answers. Do our call out and all that. Nobody answers. And then right at daylight, HQ comes on the mic and it's like, hey, there's a lot of activity next door. A lot of movement. They're digging shit up in the garden. He said, we need y'all to go check it out. So we, of course, every time we took a new compound, every 4 days, you spent from 4:30 to daylight filling sandbags. Everybody carried at least 25 sandbags with them, and that sucked. Every time, you had to fill sandbags and barricade the entryways, rooftops for our watch positions, So you're doing that every time, every 4 days, Wow. So.
And sandbag fill sucks.
Do what?
And filling sandbags sucks.
Yeah, dude. If I never see another sandbag in my life, it wouldn't bother me.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we're in the middle of doing that. We got maybe 3 sandbags high on our watch positions. And so they call us, and of course they're like, hey, we need to go check this compound next door. So we take a little fire team. We got about 8 or 9 guys, and we run out of that compound we took and go next door to, see what the hell's going on over there. They got, of course, we got the ISR above us. So they're the ones who notified us. It's like, hey, we're picking up a lot of activity on the ISR and all that. We go over there, and, dude, it was one of the worst days that, I remember being over there, because we go to run by this door, and, I don't run by the door. I run in it. And some other guys run by it, and I get on the mic like, hey, we can't run by this entry without clearing it. Dude, y'all know better than that. Of course, they're just trying to get in a fight, find what these guys are hiding and all that stuff. So I run in there, and then I got my spotter follows me. And then finally they loop back and they come in, and we start searching this compound, and there's a couple people in there. You're yelling, we had the Terp with us. Of course, he's always, doing his own damn thing, Yep. And then we had to carry these A&A guys everywhere we went. The first time we went out, we took 4 or 5 of them. Man, big pain in the ass. We couldn't go nowhere without them. Then the second time we went, we said, hey, how many of these guys are we actually required to take? And they're like, well, you have to have at least 2 of them. And so that's all we took. And we got a lot better ones. They knew some English and stuff.
Yeah.
So, we go over there, and man, I hadn't got a quarter of this building cleared. And Roland was on the roof next door. He had to bury it up there and everything. And we got into a big tick. They busted off with a damn, RPG that buzzed 2 inches from my ears.
Wow.
And that was one of the first times where I'm just like, man, if I would have leaned back, done anything, it's over with, and it was all concentrated on me and Andrew Perryman. He's still in. No, I think he is still in. It's hard for me to keep up with these guys anymore because I unplugged about 4 months ago. I got off socials altogether. So I used to keep up with them on Facebook. And now I got tired of that stuff, and I just unplugged from the rest of the world doing my own thing. You know, the older you get, the more you realize that, you know, you got very few friends, you know, in the civilian world. You know, there's still guys that I would go to war with today, you know, that I served with, but civilians, you know, they don't have the mindset that we have. No. And, you know, they wouldn't take a bullet for you. Like there wasn't a person over there that I wouldn't have took a bullet for, you know, in my group of guys. We got really tight really quick. And Roland's, he's raining down on, we finally figure out where the sniper fire and RPG comes from. It's another compound over. They had this high up spot with a open window that could, I mean, it was almost like they staged that whole scenario because they was already set up, and that was one of the worst firefights we'd been in. Wow. And, so we clear all that, and about 10 minutes into that tick, Roland takes a round in his back. And so when he did, they said, hey, we're abandoning this. We're going back, and we got to support these guys. You know, of course, we got to call in a medevac and all that. And that was the first time that we got the gloves taken off. You know, he come over the radio and said, hey, if it moves, it dies. You know, we ain't letting, you know, this is it. So that was first thing in the morning when that went down, and it was like that for the rest of the day. We called in, man, I think 7 or 8, you know, air support missions, and man, it was crazy. You know, everybody was on the wall or on a roof. There wasn't just, you know, normally we only had 2 guys on overwatch, you know, and everybody else, you know, was doing whatever. And, you know, but that day, if there was a peephole or anything, everybody was on the walls, you know, looking from every direction. And, we wasn't able to medevac Roland out to that night because we stayed, you know, of course, you know, with us being Force Recon, we had our own doc with us, you know, and he was a Navy guy, but he's not a normal Navy guy. You know, he's got the training. I forgot what they called him, but, you know, he's got all the training, you know, and he's high speed, low drag, you know, and he deserved to be there with us. You know, he was bad to the bone too, you know, and of course he was with us whenever we went on that raid next door, of course. You know, and that's what caused us to cut that short and have to go back because whenever they come on and said, you know, Roland got shot, you know, of course, we got the doc with us. We got to haul ass back. You know, we don't know the severity of it or anything at this point. And we haul ass back, and, you know, we get them off the roof and replace them. Of course, you know, when we get back, we realize we got to, you know, get some more cover because that was one of the reasons why he got shot is because he didn't have no cover. You know, they're in prone position, but, you know, he didn't have enough cover to even, you know, protect himself there. Yeah. And so we have to get all that set up and send a firefight all day. He didn't get a ride out that night, but, when the gloves come off that day, and that was the only, injury we had in them first 2 times. About the middle of the deployment, the Army was getting ready for a big push in Kandahar. And at the time, the commanding general for Afghanistan was a daggum Army dude. And that asshole pulled all the Marine dog teams that was there away from all our units and reassigned us to different units in Kandahar. So we had to pack up all our shit, and we left all the guys that, you know, you was with, you know, done built your rapport with and got to know, and we got stuck with, you know, these Army guys. And man, you don't realize how much training you actually have till you get put with 100 Army guys. And I'll never forget the first mission we went out on. You know, they put me with the Ranger guys that was there with 101st, I think 1-187 or something. It's on a couple of these commendations up here. Right. But they put us with them, Rakasans or something like that. I forget, couldn't even pronounce the dudes he was with. And we go to do a, mission that first night, and they said, we're not going to go through any entryways. We're going to climb over the walls or blow through the walls. The first time we went out, I get up there and, I'm taking off, following my spotter. Then I get down over that and I look back, and man, you see the silhouette of 30 or 40 guys standing up and running across this rooftop. And I get on the radio and I just start screaming. I say, hey, get down, get down. And we had a butter bar with us. Of course, it's nothing like being with, a Marine officer that's in charge. And I said, what are y'all doing? And he's just like, we're assaulting. I said, dude, one machine gun burst and you're all dead. How do you not realize that? They're just gradually walking across, no discipline, no sense of urgency, and of course these guys are all fresh, they've only been in country, a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And, we'd already been there 4 or 5 months, and they didn't get it, and after that, they brought me into headquarters and they put me as in charge. We had like 4 or 5 Marine dog teams. This was at Ramrod. We got moved to Fob Ramrod. Actually, it was Fob Wilson first is where we went to. And then we spread out from there, and I went to Fob Ramrod, and I had about 4 or 5 Marines with me. And then we had some other personnel. I had a female Army dog handler, and I had a Navy guy and an Air Force dude that I was over there. And of course I was a sergeant, and some of the other guys was, E6s and E7s, but I was still in charge of them.
Yeah. Right on.
That was pretty cool.
So that was at 6 months. How much longer did your deployment last, and when did you finally get out of there?
We stayed there till the end of December.
Okay.
And we didn't get to fly. I think we left either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And you know how it is if you're flying on a C-130. If that sumbitch stops anywhere, it's broke down.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got there, but anywhere it stops, it's going to be broke down for 24 hours or so. Who knows? They tell us at first 6 to 8 hours, and then about 14 hours in, they're like, oh, we're going to be here 24 hours. They got a problem, blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that really pissed me off is when they pulled all our, we had guys with like all other different branches of people with SF people and all that. And they pulled us off, put us all with the Army guys. We lost right off the bat. We lost Corporal Max Donahue. We lost him on, I think, about a week after we got, about a week after we got assigned to these other units. He was up searching a roadway, and his dog responded. Or, alerted on an IED. And of course we set up he set up a cordon, and everything, flagged it all off, and they're setting up. And as he's backing up to, set up a perimeter, he steps on an IED and it blows him and Finji up. And that was on like August the 8th of 2010. We lost him. And the first mission that my force buddies went out after I got pulled from them, they went to Sangin. Mm-hmm. So we left Helmar, we was in Helmar the first couple of times, and they went to Sangin. It was a big push that the Marine Corps was doing up there. And man, it wasn't 2 or 3 weeks in. One of the guys that slept right beside me on my second mission out with them, Jonathan Blank, he was a sergeant. Mm-hmm. He stepped on an IED and he got critically injured. He lost both of his legs from right above his kneecaps down. And several of the other guys, Roland was like a damn magnet. Dude, he was always getting hurt. That first day we went out, he twisted his ankle, had to go back to the fob for a week. And then, of course, he gets shot then, the second time. And then the third time they go out, he gets shrapnel from the IED that Jonathan steps on, and a couple of other guys, get shrapnel and gets injured and stuff. But yeah, that really pissed me off.
I bet.
Because the whole time I was with them, we had zero injuries other than that time, zero injuries to IEDs.
Yeah.
I felt like, I was helping keeping our guys, safe and all. And that pissed me off so bad that I felt like it's always haunted me. I felt like Jonathan would still have his legs if they wouldn't have pulled me from him, because Rona would have alerted on that, hands down. It was a big enough IED that she would have got on odor way before the actual explosive device, So that really pissed me off. And Jonathan, he's actually works with Black Rifle Coffee now. Mm-hmm. You'll see him on their advertisement commercial, and I've always thought it's pretty cool to know the military guy that they're putting on their advertisement, because they're not going to advertise who he is and all that. He got real lucky. Lieutenant Dan was a Swayze dude.
Yeah.
He built Jonathan a damn house.
That's cool.
So he got a house, built for him in Texas, where he was from. He got out a year or two after we got back. And, then going back to our deployment, you was asking about the injuries and stuff. Jonathan stepped on the IED first with the recon dudes, and we lose Corporal Donahue. And then in September, my actual roommate that I was roommates with before our deployment, he stepped on a damn IED and he got injured real bad, and he lost his dog. And his dog's name was Grief. His name was Alfred Brenner. He was a corporal. Matter of fact, he ended up writing a book, Surviving with Grief.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
And ironically, it's already a bestseller on Amazon. He's been spreading the message and talking about what people we had to go through and everything ever since he got back. He's stand up, golden dude. And Chris Willingham, one of the other buddies, he was the kennel master. He stayed in whenever we got out. Obviously, he was already a lifer, and he got to travel around, do a lot of, interviews with different major news people and all that over his dog that stepped on an IED with a junior Marine that was on our first deployment. And it's like 2 years later. His name was Juan Rodriguez. He got assigned with Luca, was his dog's name. And she was so special to me is because Rona and Luca were out of the same group of dogs out of Tel Aviv. Okay. So she was, both of them was Israeli SSDs, and their tattoo numbers, were Kilo 458 and Kilo 459. They were one number off, but she lost a leg and stepping on IED. They gotten smart, they changed, their tactics once they figured out what SSD were. They started putting the pressure plates behind the damn IEDs. So they set it up to where by the time the dog responded on it, they would have a pressure plate or something behind them so that it would, cause more casualties in the whole, group of guys out there.
Right.
You was always changing, the way they did it. You could never figure them out. You couldn't stay on top of them, man. And you don't know how they was communicating and everything else. It was every day was a new day. You didn't know going out, from day to day.
So when did you, so you came home in December 2010. And how much longer did you stay in? When did you punch out? And tell me what that decision was like.
Well, we actually didn't get back till sometime in January, about the first week of January. Of course, it took us a week or two to get back. We was hung out in different places, spent Christmas eating some out of gas station food. The only thing that was open on Christmas Day was some gas station, and we ate, sandwiches, bologna sandwiches and crap out of there, trying to make our way back. And we got back about the first, second week of January, and I'd already made up my mind that I wanted to get out.
Yep.
And because I got a daughter, she was born in 2004, July 2004. And I married her mom whenever I PCS from Quantico to Pendleton. I had 10 days to make that move. And when I come through Arkansas, I stayed there a few days, and I ended up marrying her, and they went out to Pendleton with me. And of course, just like most Marine Corps marriages, they fail within 4 or 5 months, and she left. She was in Pendleton with me for 5 months, and she left and, told me she wanted a divorce. 2 weeks later, I didn't even know we were fighting,
Yep.
Calls a commanding officer, how she finds that information, gets me in a whole lot of shit, and I hadn't done a damn thing wrong, and blah, blah, blah. And so it took a year for me to divorce her. I figured out I could file for divorce myself, didn't have to hire a lawyer. And I took a bunch of classes out there in California, and it was sweet, man. I got to do everything myself, and it took a year-long process, but our divorce was final the day before we left for Afghanistan.
Okay.
So I knew that I wanted to be in my daughter's life, and I wasn't going to be able to do that if I was going to stay in the Marine Corps. So I had when we got back in January, I had 10 months left on contract because I went in 10 October 06 and was supposed to get out 9 October of 11. But they had some, that's when, part of that time that they were trying to downsize the Marine Corps whenever we got back. So they had a program out, where they'd let you, EAS, they would move your EAS date up to 90 days ahead of time if you were going to get out to further your education. So you had to put in a package saying you're already accepted to college and this or that. And the Marine Corps would change your EAS date and, up to 90 days ahead to, allow you to further your education. So I decided I was going to go to college because I wanted to get out 90 days earlier was the main reason. I wanted to do whatever I could do to be able to get to my daughter, sooner. I hadn't seen her in over a year and a half at this point.
Wow.
So I put it in the package, get all that accepted. And I already knew, before we'd ever deployed that, I wanted to get out. So I started saving up leave for terminal leave. So I had 60 days saved up. So I got out in May. They changed the ironic thing, they changed my EAS from October 9 to July 9th. And that's my daughter's birthday.
Oh, wow.
So I'll never forget that date, whenever I got out, she was born July 9th, 04. I got out, my actual EAS date was July 9, 2011. But I got out in May, is when I actually got to leave, on my terminal leave and come back to Arkansas. And to be honest, it was a struggle. Whenever I got out, I did connect with this one other guy. I got out in May and of course, college wasn't in until August. So I moved back into my same place I was in whenever I left the Marine Corps. And I go back to work at the motorcycle shop that I grew up working in. It's Cooper Motorcycles. And they're in town. And I'd started working in there almost immediately after we moved to Arkansas. And so I already had a lot of experience there. And I come back and I start working there. Of course, I got a pocket full of money because you just get back from Afghanistan. You got your deployment money and stuff. So I wasn't really trying to hustle or nothing. I was in pretty good shape, at that time. And it wasn't what I expected. Before I left, I was really popular. I was always a popular guy in school, had a lot of, good times with different people. And I thought when I got back, man, I'm going to call up my buddies, we're going to drink some beer and party, have all these girls and stuff. And it's almost like it was a different world. I was gone for 5 years and nothing was the same. These same buddies that you was partying with before you left, done moved on with their lives. They done started families and, got a career going and nothing's the same. So, you come back thinking you're going to go back to how it was before you left and joined the military. And it's like a wake up call, man. And a bunch of other stuff just starts pissing you off, that you never would have dreamed of before. You get upset about stuff and, things that people would do and say and all that. And then going to college, man, that was, I had to bite my tongue so much, but whenever I joined the Marine Corps, I was already older when I joined the military. I wasn't 17 or 18 fresh out of high school. I'd already been on my own, working, had my own place and everything else. And I think that's another thing that made me succeed so much whenever I went in, because I was already, taking care of myself. I wasn't fresh off mom's tit or nothing like that. I already knew how life worked. So that's why I felt like it was so easy for me to assume a leadership role, is because I'm already older than these guys. Hell, most of them had never even had a real job or nothing at all. So I get out and now I'm the old guy going to college. I've already done 5 years in the Marine Corps and now I'm in college. I'm like, that was 2011. So, and I'd have to do the math on it. So I'm several years older than 99% of these people. And luckily, one dude in there, I was going for mechanical engineering. There's one dude going for the same thing. He's a grunt, Marine grunt. So we connected, and we would sit next to each other and on. I think it helped. He just got out too. And I think that me and him connecting helped both of us make it
absolutely
a lot easier, because we would cut up and, make our own jokes and shit, make fun of these kids, these kids wearing socks and sandals. Like, who does that? We'd be clowning, and we was just kind of away from the rest of the people because they were all, 18, 19 years old, and they hadn't even, they had no clue what the real world was really like. He'd done a deployment to Iraq and all. So we connected and got to be pretty good buddies while we was going to school together. And I only done that one semester of college because I had to maintain a certain GPA and everything the whole time I was in, to meet my requirements for my early release from the Marine Corps. So I'd already started putting in applications, and when we was off on that Christmas break, I put in an application for the Union Pacific Railroad as a transportation employee. And while we was off on that break, I got called in for an interview. And I'd had an interview prior to going into the military. That was one of the reasons why I went in. I had an interview in 2006, and I'd already been trying to get on for almost 3 years. And I had one interview, and I said, look, if I don't get this job with the railroad, I'm going to the Marine Corps, because I've read where the Union Pacific Railroad was the #1 most military and friendly employer. Wow. So I said, well, yeah, if I go do 4 or 5 years in the Marine Corps, I won't have a problem getting on. So that was one of the plans going in. So long story short, cut back, I'm out on that Christmas break, and I'd already re-enrolled for the next semester and all that, but I get this interview with the railroad and I go in, do it. I pass everything with flying colors, get a actual sit-down interview with them again. And I told the guy, I said, look, man, I said, I need to know yes or no real quick, because I'm supposed to start back school middle of January, and I'll have to repay back all these, grants and all this crap. if I don't go to school? And the very next day, I get an email saying they've extended a job offer. So, and it was for a conductor position on the railroad. Wow. And it started out making, like $80,000 a year. And if I was to stay on as a mechanical engineer, like the highest paying job in the state was only like 85,000. That was maxed out. So I'm like, how the hell would I do 3 more years of this? And I can start making this kind of money now and go up from there. That's when I just, dropped out of college and accepted that position on the railroad. And that was a adjustment, because it was the railroad. Believe it or not, that railroad is a whole lot like the military. If it makes sense, let's do the complete opposite. That kind of, you don't know how they make, $4.6 billion a year when you're in the trenches actually doing the work, and the way you got your hands tied, it's so much like, you got your hands tied. You can't do it the fast way. You got to do it the railroad way, the safe way.
Yeah.
And so that's where I actually met Brian Clifton, the guy that, told you about me. So that's where I met him. And it was a whole lot of similarities as far as how it's run and, the bullshit you got to put up with and all. It's just, I'd never understand. And it's still to this day, I actually got in a little bit of trouble in my training because I figured out real quick, it didn't make sense to me. They would spend all this money hiring you and training you. They trained you for 3.5 months to be a conductor. And as soon as you marked up and got your certificate, they were looking for a way to fire you. What? And I was just like, why in the hell are they running around, testing us, making sure, trying to fire us? And when they just spent $60,000 training us. So during our training, we had some managers come in to talk to us in our last couple of weeks. And, of course, I'm an outspoken guy. So all the instructors know me and everything, during all the training and all that. And we had a couple of managers come in. They're just like, asking us questions and stuff. And anyhow, they called on me for something and asked me about how I felt about it. And I said, I ain't going to lie, this doesn't make any sense to me. And he's just, because the instructors had already told us we got 60 days whenever we graduate from our training that we're on a derail process, they call it. And during your derail period, they could fire you and terminate you completely for almost anything you done wrong. Didn't make a shit if it was your fault or not. You go out there and you get hurt on the job and no fault of your own, they would terminate you.
Wow.
And the instructor had told me that a couple of days before that. And so that was still spinning around in my head. And when the managers come in, talking to us, I spoke up about it. And I said, man, I think it's bullshit. And he's just like, excuse me? And he's just like, what are you talking about? I said, I brought it up. It's like, it makes no sense to me how y'all can terminate us, our first 60 days and it not be any fault of our own. Wow. Why is this place operating like that? And he didn't have a real.
No, they never do. Those organizations, it is what it is. Once they become these Goliaths of corporations, it never seems like anything makes sense, much like the military. All right, let's wrap it up. Tell me about what were the greatest lessons that you learned from your time in the Marine Corps, and what would you recommend to young men who are thinking about going in right now?
Well, some of my greatest lessons was, learning what integrity was and, all that kind of stuff, the real values and stuff that the military teaches you about, and I guess, the way it makes you grow up, my 3 months in the military. I mean, I was already almost 21 years old when I joined, but them 13 weeks of boot camp, man, I grew up more than 13 weeks, than I did, the rest of my life, and, these new guys coming in, I would tell them, man, apply yourself, and learn about it before you ever join. And there's no greater brotherhood than the Marine Corps. If you do happen to earn the title and earn that Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, there's no greater feeling on earth than when you get that pinned on your chest. It's a brotherhood that, like you said earlier, it never dies. The people that you deploy with and the people that you train with and do stuff with every day, you create a bond with that's never ending. If they call you, if one of my buddies, Roland, Andrew, any of them Force boys, if they call me saying, hey man, I need you out here, I'm shutting down my shop, putting sign on the door, and I'm gone in a couple hours. We're going wherever they're at. We're going to help them, So do something that challenges yourself, Don't just join the cheer force because it's the easiest one to go to, everybody says, and, don't do it because it's easy, don't, try to, challenge yourself and make yourself a better person, because there's so many people, when you get out of the military and you people, ask you about your time in service stuff, and every one of them, all these Army guys, Air Force guys, they always say, man, he said, I almost joined the Marines, but what, you got scared, why didn't you? And just, it's a challenge, and it puts so much respect in front of your name, that this people just knowing that you're a Marine, I mean, it puts fear in most of their eyes, where you can walk around and almost feel like Superman, because these people, they look at you and, you're a Marine and this and that, and they're going to think twice about what they say to you and how they speak to you. And one thing that I still haven't figured out is why Marines, when they get drunk, every time, no matter what, if you go out with a group of Marines and you get drunk, there's going to be a fight. Marines love to fight, dude.
That's true.
And even now, I got so damn mad at my nephew that drugged me out to a bar a couple of weeks ago. And I told him, there's a bar right down the road from my house. I'm like, man, we can go down there. I'm not worried about getting 2 miles back down here to the house. We'll walk if we have to. I said, don't carry me into town, though. Of course, you know what happens. You make a plan, and then, the drinks start rolling and you see some hotties in there, and it's like, where are we going? Of course, we end up at this other place. And, however, it's almost like Marines are magnets to trouble. They're just magnets, man. There's always every weekend. And it's like, there's so many more admins and stuff that are wrote behind this junior Marine getting in trouble out in town, and causing shit and stirring up a scene. They're just magnets to.
Well, I think Marines are magnets to the fight always. It's just the way it's been for 250 years. It's the way it will always be as long as that esprit de corps just continues. So, Sergeant Tommy James, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story with my audience, and just a real privilege and a pleasure to meet you.
Man, it was an honor to meet you, Dan, or David, I'm sorry.
All right.
And I never got the chance to work with any SEAL guys, but I did. My buddy Mendoza, that's still in there, his first deployment to Iraq, he got to work with some, and that was in either 07 or 08. And, that was, it was cool to know, he got to work with y'all. And then, to know, like, even whenever the SEAL guys went in there and, took out Osama, the fact that, they had a Mal with them, I said, man, that would have probably been me if I would have stayed in.
That's right. That's right.
So, unfortunately, one other reason why I got out of the military, because whenever I got out, they was putting MARSOC together and making it bigger. And if you met the requirements of MARSOC, you had to go take the assessment. Mm-hmm. And I met all the requirements, so that if I wanted to re-enlist, I couldn't re-enlist and be a K9 handler anymore. I was going to have to re-enlist and go to MARSOC, which didn't bother me whatsoever especially after working with the force guys and all that, so. But one thing that was kind of a Debbie Downer for me is during all that screening process, they asked you if you've ever had a concussion. And my dumb ass told the truth. I said, yeah, I had a concussion whenever I was a kid, and that disqualified me. Yeah. So, well, I could have re-enlisted after that, but I lost the interest, I was motivated and always gung ho, to if I, even though I'm a Marine, I want to be the baddest Marine, there is,
Mm-hmm. For sure. So, all right, Sergeant. Thank you so much. God bless you. And I wish you all the best, man. Semper Fi.
Hey, God bless. And tomorrow's the Marine Corps' 250th birthday. And I just want to sign off with saying happy birthday, Marines.
Hoorah.